Imagine waking up one morning to a world that suddenly feels unfamiliar, a world where the US dollar, the currency that has acted as the backbone of global trade, international reserves, commodity pricing, and financial stability for nearly 8 decades, no longer sits firmly at the center of the world economy, and instead a completely new currency emerges from a coalition of nations known as BRICS, a currency many are calling the new dollar. What would that mean for you, for your savings, for global markets, for the geopolitical balance of power, and for the long-term future of the financial system as we know it? Today on Retro Finance Files, we dive into one of the most important what-if scenarios of our lifetime. What happens if BRICS launches a new global currency and triggers the biggest currency shock the world has seen since the collapse of Bretton Woods? To understand the scale of such a moment, we must first understand the foundation. Since the end of World War II, the US dollar has dominated the global financial architecture. At the historic Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, 44 nations gathered and effectively crowned the US dollar, the world's reserve currency, backed at the time by American gold. Even after the US abandoned the gold standard in 1971, the dollar remained supreme. Today, according to the IMF, around 58% of all global foreign exchange reserves are held in dollars, meaning central banks around the world keep more than half their rainy day funds in US currency. More than 80% of all global oil transactions are priced in dollars, and nearly 90% of the world's currency trades involve the dollar on one side of the exchange. International corporations borrow in dollars, emerging markets denominate debt in dollars, and global investors treat U.S. Treasury bonds as the safest financial assets ever created. In fact, the U.S. Treasury market, worth more than $26 trillion, functions as the beating heart of global finance. This dominance gives the United States enormous benefits. The U.S. can borrow cheaply because everyone wants dollars. It can run deficits far larger than any other nation. It can impose sanctions that cut off entire countries from the global economy. And its financial system has become so deeply integrated into global trade that the dollar's influence extends into nearly every corner of the world, from Wall Street to Shanghai, from oil fields in Saudi Arabia to factories in Brazil. But dominance has consequences. Over the last 2 decades, many countries have grown increasingly uneasy with a world where one nation controls the currency, the payment networks, the sanction systems, and the financial institutions. For countries like Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and others that have faced U.S. sanctions, the dollar system feels less like a neutral economic platform and more like a geopolitical tool. Even rising powers like China and India, who trade heavily in global markets, question whether the current system fairly represents a multipolar world. As a result, BRICS, originally Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has grown from a loose economic group into a geopolitical force representing more than 3 billion people and nearly 1/3 of global GDP by purchasing power parity. In the last 2 years alone, BRICS has expanded dramatically, now including Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the UAE. Several other nations have applied or expressed interest, including Indonesia, Nigeria, Thailand, Argentina, and even Turkey. This expansion is important because it includes some of the world's largest oil producers, fastest growing economies, and strongest commodity exporters. These nations have one thing in common: a desire to reduce their dependence on the US dollar. For years, BRICS leaders have publicly discussed the idea of a shared currency, or at least a shared financial system that bypasses the dollar. But contrary to rumors, BRICS has not yet announced a single BRICS dollar or Euro-style shared currency. Instead, the discussions have focused on several realistic models: a basket-based reserve asset backed by all BRICS national currencies, a commodity-linked digital currency supported by gold, oil metals, or rare earth minerals, or a powerful cross-border payment system integrated across BRICS countries that allows trade without using dollars at all. In reality, the third option, payments infrastructure, is already happening. China's SEEP system, Russia's mirror network, India's UPI-based cross-border payment experiments, and the development of BRICS Pay all point toward a world where nations bypass SWIFT, Visa, MasterCard, and other Western-controlled networks. Combined, these systems process billions of dollars in transactions annually, and that number is rapidly increasing. Now imagine BRICS formally launches a new BRICS currency, whether digital, commodity-backed, or basket-based. What happens next? The first major impact would be declining global demand for the US dollar. Today, countries must hold dollars to trade internationally, repay debts, buy oil, and settle large transactions. If a meaningful portion of global trade shifts into a BRICS currency, countries would need fewer dollars and more BRICS units. That move alone could raise US borrowing costs significantly. Why? Because fewer dollars circulating globally means fewer foreign buyers of US Treasury bonds, which are the primary way the US government funds itself. With the US national debt now above $34 trillion, even a small rise in interest rates could strain the US budget, increase taxes, reduce spending, and potentially weaken the dollar further. The second major impact would hit global commodity markets. If oil-producing nations like Saudi Arabia or the UAE begin pricing oil in a BRICS currency, it would strike at the core of the petrodollar system established in the 1970s. This system is the backbone of dollar dominance. Countries must buy dollars to buy oil, creating endless demand. If that changes, the global financial center of gravity shifts with it. Oil, natural gas, copper, wheat, and iron ore could all begin trading in multiple currencies. The world would no longer have one anchor currency, but several competing pricing systems. The third impact would be geopolitical. The U.S. uses the dollar system as a tool of influence. Sanctions work because banks around the world need access to the dollar system to function. If BRICS builds a separate financial architecture, countries under sanctions, or those who want more autonomy, would have an escape hatch. This would dramatically reduce U.S. leverage and accelerate the formation of geopolitical blocs. A Western bloc aligned with the dollar and a BRICS-led bloc aligned with the new currency. The fourth impact would hit global financial markets. The dollar supports trillions in contracts, derivatives, loans, and trade agreements. A shift away from the dollar could cause volatility across bond markets, stock markets, and currency exchanges. Hedge funds, pension funds, central banks, and corporations would need to rebalance portfolios, potentially triggering large sell-offs. The fifth impact would touch ordinary people. A weaker dollar means higher import prices, more expensive travel, higher inflation, and potentially a lower standard of living in the U.S. For people outside the U.S., things become complicated. Some nations may benefit from new financial freedoms, while others struggle with currency instability or increased borrowing costs. With these impacts in mind, let's explore potential timelines. The most likely scenario is gradual transition. Over the next decade, BRICS strengthens local currency trade, increases gold purchases, builds digital payment networks, and encourages other nations to join. The dollar remains dominant, but loses ground from 58% of reserves to perhaps 45%. This is manageable, but still a meaningful shift in global power. A second scenario is accelerated disruption, triggered by a geopolitical event, such as a major U.S. debt crisis, a conflict, or the emergence of a commodity-backed BRICS digital currency. This could rapidly reduce dollar demand, weaken the currency, and cause inflation. The least likely but most traumatic scenario is systemic shock. BRICS launches a strong commodity-backed digital currency. Saudi Arabia prices oil in it. China adopts it for Belt and Road trade, and dozens of developing nations join the system. Global markets split into two camps, financial flows fragment, and the dollar's supremacy erodes rapidly. But here is the crucial point. Even in the most extreme scenario, the dollar does not disappear. The U.S. economy remains huge, its financial markets deep, its military powerful, and its institutions stable. BRICS nations face internal challenges. China has strict capital controls. Russia faces sanctions. India avoids alliances. Brazil is politically unstable, and South Africa struggles with infrastructure issues. Creating a unified currency among such diverse nations is extremely difficult. But BRICS doesn't need to replace the dollar to create a currency shock. It only needs to weaken it. The world is already shifting. Central banks are buying record amounts of gold, the highest levels in more than 50 years, because they want alternatives to U.S. debt. Countries are signing local currency trade deals at the fastest pace in modern history. And the rise of digital currencies, blockchain-based settlement, and instant cross-border payments makes it easier than ever to bypass the dollar. So what does this mean for the future? We are witnessing the slow birth of a multipolar financial world, a world with multiple reserve currencies, competing payment systems, and diverse economic alliances. The BRICS currency is not the end of the dollar era, but the end of unquestioned dollar dominance. For regular people, this means paying attention. Inflation risks, currency fluctuations, higher interest rates, and market volatility may become more common. But there will also be opportunities. New trade routes, diversified investments, more competition between financial systems, and a more balanced global economy. Throughout history, dominant currencies rise and fall. The Roman denarius, the Venetian ducat, the Spanish real, the Dutch guilder, the British pound, and now the U.S. dollar. No currency rules forever. The coming currency shock, if BRICS launches its own new dollar, will not destroy the global financial system, but it will transform it. The question is not if things change, but how fast. And when that moment arrives, the world will witness one of the greatest financial turning points since the mid-20th century. If you found this analysis eye-opening, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Retro Finance Files for more deep dives into the hidden forces shaping global finance, economic history, and the future of money. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.